Wow, it's kinda hard to wrap my head around the fact that it's been 3 years since I released my first Zelda theory. It's been a while since I've watched it, so maybe I should watch it again for old time's sake.
It's kinda weird to think how much the Legend of Zelda series has had an impact on video games. From the original
Oh
Legend
god,
of
this
Zelda
sucks.
Wild, every
Surely there's
game
something I can do about this. I got it! Let's see, move this here, add some effects there, and there! I think this is worthy of a 3-year anniversary. It's kind of weird to think about how much the Zelda series has had an impact on video games. From the original Legend of Zelda to Echoes of Wisdom, every single game has something unique and charming about it. In fact, I'd argue that The Legend of Zelda is one of the few series that doesn't have a single bad game.
Gee, it sure is boring around here.
My boy.
They don't count. However, this isn't to say that there aren't some divisive entries in the series, with one in particular being hailed as the franchise's black sheep. Hell, it's one of the only games that Shigeru Miyamoto himself has gone on record as saying that it didn't live up to his expectations. And that game is none other than Zelda II: The Adventure of Link. Now, a lot of you probably saw this coming. Many people, myself included, have some strong opinions on Zelda 2, with some even going as far as to say that Zelda 2 is a bad game. While I no longer share this opinion, I can see why people would think this. Instead of a top-down perspective like the first game, Zelda 2 opted for a side-scrolling view with RPG-esque gameplay, the only game in the series to do this. The whole thing is linear with confusing dungeons, and it's filled to the brim with forced NES difficulty. Seriously, you can die from literal bubbles. No, I am not over that! But while many people have brushed Zelda 2 off in favor of other games in the series, I think that Zelda 2 might be more important than people realize. In fact, I think it might help us to solve one of the most debated topics in recent years: the timeline placement of the Wild Era games. Now, admittedly, this theory is still dumb. Really dumb. Like, Link is dead in Majora's Mask levels of dumb. It requires a lot of what-if questions to be asked, but if you bear with me for the next few minutes, I might be able to convince you to see my way of thinking. So, sit back, relax, make sure you've hit that subscribe button, and let's get started. To start this theory off, let me take you back to before Breath of the Wild had even been released. Since the second the game was revealed, fans began speculating as to where in the timeline the game took place. During one of the Nintendo Treehouse live streams where they showed off gameplay of Breath of the Wild, fans were quick to notice that the description of the rock salt item said that it was, quote, a crystallized salt from an ancient sea. This set off a lot of alarm bells, as this would mean that Breath of the Wild would take place in the adult timeline long after the events of Wind Waker. This would also explain the appearances of both the Koroks and the Rito, two species that only appear in the adult timeline. It seems like a solid cut and dry case. Until you realize that Lynels and Spectacle Rock only appear in the Downfall timeline. Okay, so the game takes place in the Downfall timeline, and the rock salt must come from a completely different ancient sea. I mean, Zelda Note seems to support that, so that makes perfect sense. Except for the fact that Goron Link is carved into the mountain in Goron City, a figure that only appears in the Child timeline. Add to that the fact that the ruins of the Arbiter's grounds are found in the Gerudo Desert, and things just get even more confusing. These games have evidence of every timeline, and it seems like that was intentional. Series producer Eiji Aonuma gave a purposely vague answer when asked about Breath of the Wild's timeline placement, so it largely seemed like Nintendo had just chosen to do away with the timeline entirely. Until they decided to give Echoes of Wisdom an official placement in the Downfall timeline, and left the Wild Era games completely disconnected from everything else. Every game before Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom happened so long ago that they've been relegated to a singular point on the timeline called the Era of Myth. Now, while some fans have chosen to interpret this as the Wild Era games being in their own continuity, others have theorized that, somehow, the timelines were merged together. At this point, you're probably wondering what Zelda 2 has to do with any of this. Well, it's simple. Zelda 2 is the key to solving this debate. Now, this idea largely hinges on the theory that the timelines have merged. Personally, I think that it's the best way for the Wild Era games to have the characteristics of each timeline without saying that they're just references and don't mean anything. But then, if the timelines have merged, that begs the question: how were they merged? This isn't a feat that can be easily pulled off by anyone. You would need divine intervention or something equally as powerful to pull this off. Something like the Triforce. The Triforce is the only feasible way that the three timelines could suddenly merge together into one. Whoever wields it can make whatever wish they want when they want it and have it come true. So it would be safe to assume that someone with a pure, balanced heart wished on the Triforce for the timelines to merge into one. So that explains how the timelines were merged, but I can do you one better. I think I can tell you who merged the timelines and why they did it. I believe that the person who merged the timelines was none other than Zelda the First. So, who is Zelda the First? Well, in the manual of Zelda II, it's explained that long before Hyrule fell to ruin due to Ganon's invasion, there was a great king who used the Triforce to maintain peace and order in Hyrule. When he died, the prince should have become king and inherit the Triforce, but instead, he only received the Triforce of Power. The prince searched everywhere in the kingdom for the missing pieces of wisdom and courage, but he was unable to find them. It was then that a magician close to the king revealed to the prince that before he had died, the king told the prince's sister, Zelda, something about the Triforce. The magician and prince confronted Zelda and told her to tell them the whereabouts of the two missing pieces of the Triforce. But Zelda refused. In a fit of anger, the magician began to cast a spell that would put Zelda into an eternal sleep from which she would never wake. The prince tried to stop him, but it was too late. Zelda was put to sleep, and conveniently afterward, the magician died. In his grief, the prince placed Zelda on an altar in a room within the North Palace. So that the tragedy would never be forgotten, the prince decreed that every female born into the royal family would be named Zelda. Many years later, after the events of the first game, Link woke up to find a strange mark on the back of his left hand. Upon showing it to Impa, she took the young hero to the North Palace, revealing a secret room where Zelda the First was laying on an altar. Impa explains the plot to Link before giving him a scroll and 6 gems. The scroll indicated that the Triforce of Courage had been hidden away in the Great Palace, and the only way to access it was to undo the binding force that protected it. Through the course of the game, Link ventures across Hyrule, defeating the guardians in each dungeon and placing a gem into the forehead of each statue at the end. Once all 6 gems have been placed, Link enters the Great Palace, defeats his shadow, and obtains the Triforce of Courage. He returns to the North Palace, and with the pieces of power and wisdom from the first game, Link uses the full Triforce to break the spell and wake the sleeping Zelda. Now, this is where I'm going to need you to stick with me, as we're about to do some heavy speculation. According to the Zelda timeline, there's a small era of history called the Golden Era. During this era, Hyrule prospers thanks to the royal family using the Triforce to maintain peace. Now, we don't know how long the Golden Era lasted, but we know for a fact that it ended once the Triforce was split by the king and the tragedy of Zelda the First occurred. But then, this begs the question, why did the king split the Triforce? Well, maybe it's because he didn't trust the prince. I mean, he did angrily confront his sister with a magician that had the ability to put people into an eternal sleep, so I could see why his dad probably didn't want him to have unlimited power. So then, why is Zelda the First the most likely person to have merged the timelines? Why couldn't it have been any other version of Zelda? Well, it's simple. Zelda the First is the only one who could have done it. While imagery of the Triforce appears throughout the series, the relic itself is a focal point in the plot of a handful of games. The Legend of Zelda, The Adventure of Link, A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, Skyward Sword, A Link Between Worlds, and Echoes of Wisdom. The timeline wasn't split at the end of Ocarina of Time, so the Zeldas of those games couldn't have been the ones to do it. All the other games take place at the beginning or middle of their respective timelines, so if the Zelda of those games had wished for the timelines to be merged, all of the games following them would exist in a single unified timeline. The only place where it makes sense for the timeline to be merged is in Zelda II, at the very end of the Downfall timeline. So, if the timelines truly merged after Zelda 2, and it was Zelda the First who merged the timelines, then we're left with one final question. Why? Why would Zelda the First merge the timelines, and how would she even be aware of the timelines in the first place? Well, I think the answer once again comes back to the Triforce, specifically the Triforce of Wisdom. While there's no definitive way to prove it, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that the Triforce of Wisdom could give its bearer knowledge of the other timelines and the events that occurred in them. Zelda the First may have decided to merge the timelines in order to keep the Triforce safe and limit the number of people from using it. She may have seen the numerous threats in other timelines, specifically Ganondorf, and realized that the best way to protect her kingdom, as well as all the other Hyrules out there, was to make sure that there was only one Triforce. That way, the Zelda series wouldn't have to go the creatively bankrupt path of introducing a multiverse. Meta jokes aside, this could also be used to explain the confusion around Rauru founding the Kingdom of Hyrule in Tears of the Kingdom. The timelines merging could have essentially been a soft reset of sorts. However, this leaves us with one more question. Where is the Triforce now? Do people continue to fight over it for countless millennia? Is there another bloody war like the Interloper War and the Sealing War? It seems only natural to assume that people would once again fight for the Triforce. However, I think that Zelda the First knew this could happen. I think that in order to prevent her kingdom from ever falling into ruin again due to a war over some magical triangles, she hid the Triforce in a place that no one would ever look. Where, you might ask? Well, you've already seen where it is. The Triforce is in Zelda herself. Think about it. At the end of Breath of the Wild, when Zelda seals Calamity Ganon, we see the full Triforce appear as she uses her sealing magic. We even see it earlier in the game when her sealing powers first awaken. Not only that, but if we look at the tapestry that tells of the Calamity from 10,000 years ago, right under the Zelda of that era is none other than the full Triforce. In order to prevent the Triforce from ever falling into the wrong hands again, Zelda the First made sure that the Triforce would be passed down to each new Zelda, all the way down to the Zelda of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Eventually, as thousands of years passed, knowledge of the Triforce faded from memory, with only its image remaining as the symbol of the kingdom. The Triforce's power would come to be known as the sealing power of the royal family. And I mean, as long as the Triforce is kept in the safe hands of the royal family, then nothing bad can happen, right? Well, as long as they know how to use it.